Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show. This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by PDF Expert by Readle. Learn more at pdfexpert.com.
The difference between what a kindergarten, first grade student is able to produce on the iPad as opposed to what a second, third, fourth, fifth grade student is able to produce, and the ease in the production of those things is just, it's incredible. It's night and day. Keynote is my jam. An hourly basis, we're going through, here's some different way to use Keynote for students to be creative, whether that's designing album covers, editing photographs, tutorials, making movies, all that stuff. It's just it is the Swiss Army knife of my iPad. My students leave my class knowing that.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. On this very special episode of the podcast, we are joined by Mike Lang, who's recently featured by Apple on MLK Day in the Apple Newsroom. Last month, he initiated a 3-part project with his kindergarten and first grade students to honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and instill a sense of civic duty in them. Every student has their own iPad, and his projects really take advantage of the iPad, enabling students to express themselves in ways that would be difficult to on, say, a Chromebook, which we talk about a bit in this interview. I'd encourage you to read the release by Apple if you haven't already. It is linked to in this chapter marker and is in the show notes of the podcast. In this interview, we dive into that project detailed in the write-up by Apple and a myriad of topics related to using the iPad for education, especially in this remote learning environment we find ourselves in 2021. Before we jump into the interview, I want to take a moment to thank this episode's sponsor, PDF Expert by Readle. Learn more at pdfexpert.com and download it today for free in the App Store. This is an incredible tool for teachers and students alike. I'll be sharing more about this incredible app later on in this episode. My thanks again to Readle for their support of iPad Pros. With that, here's my interview with Mike. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. This is a cool surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. So I heard about you through the Apple release about what you're doing, and we'll get to that in a second. Can you just first kind of introduce yourself and what you do?
I'm a technology instructor. I've been a technology instructor for the last 6 or 7 years. I started off as a traditional teacher. So right now I work in Las Vegas, Lower Deering Elementary School with 846 of the greatest students in the world. I've been doing this now. This is the conclusion of my 17th year. Lots of good times, lots of learning. Really, really enjoy what I do. Especially with the opportunity to have students think about how to solve problems in creative ways. I think that's the most fun I've had doing my job.
What was your original subject before you transitioned to being focused on technology? So
I started off in Pascagoula, Mississippi at St. Peter the Apostle School, which is no longer there. Hurricane Katrina had a say in that school's existence. But I started off as a 4th grade teacher, and I started off as a 4th grade teacher because I remember my 4th grade year being a waste of my education. My teacher, I think she was very well intentioned, but she didn't teach us anything academically. And so when I decided to go into the profession, I was like, I want to start in 4th grade. And so I started there, a shotgun school, 1 hallway, 1 bathroom. The first year I had 12 students and old, outdated textbooks. It was a really, really interesting deal with no technology whatsoever.
Yeah.
Outside of a wonky PC we had at our house. Looking back on it, it was a disturbing way to teach, given that there's no way to have adequately prepared those students for the knowledge work of the current time without the use of anything. Like those kids didn't touch technology at all. Went from there and taught 4th grade at another little Catholic school after Hurricane Katrina had destroyed our school. We had to kind of integrate with another school. It's from there that I went to Taiwan. The state of Indiana had a cool exchange program with Taiwan, and they sent 4 teachers over. I had a teacher's license in Indiana as well. So they sent 4 teachers to Taiwan, and 4 Taiwanese teachers came to Indiana and taught in Indiana schools. It was there that I really started to figure out that I wanted to teach. Rachel Mama, as I call her now, my Chinese mom, who was my co-teacher, really she helped me understand pedagogy in a way that I don't think I was taught here in the States. A little strange little invention called the iPod was invented while I was over in Taiwan. I happened upon a blog post with a gentleman who was like talking about how he was teaching his entire class off of his iPod. So I'm like, this is pretty interesting. Like, this is cool. And so he had screenshots and he's walking you through it and stuff. I'm like, man, I wonder if I can do this for these Taiwanese kids. So started downloading music, clean hip hop stuff, classic rock and everything, and started to integrate those into the classroom to help those kids learn English. Really it paid, dividends because you had kids singing those songs during their recess time and as they passed you and stuff. And so they were getting the nuance of slang and, and vernacular and whatnot. It was really cool. And so that kind of spurred me when I left after that year, when I came to Vegas, to say, okay, this work with, Chinese speaking Taiwanese kids, got to work for English speaking kids too. And so moved to Vegas, sight unseen. I rented an apartment, had never seen the apartment before, just got it done. Went to Kirkale Adams Elementary School. The first week of school there was a set of Dell laptops that no one was using. And so after school one day, just rolled the laptops in my classroom and locked the door, and they became my laptops. And after that, it was, how can I get the kids we started podcasting and playing with Audacity and stuff like that. It was like in the wild, the early days of, ed tech, right? So Audacity and EduBlogs was my big, every kid had their own little blog portfolio and stuff. And I started to look at Craigslist as a way to very quickly source cheap tech.
Right.
As quickly as Apple was turning those iPods around, people were trying to get rid of them. So I was like, all right, cool, give them to me. And so I had this Frankenstein cart of iPods, which was also cool. The kids could utilize for things. And it just got progressively worse from there. I moved to another school and they had an iPod cart. I started to think about how I could preload content on iPods for all the kids. They could put their headphones on and I could essentially pull small groups all day. And that was kind of cool. And then I ended up at a school that was the worst school in the state of Nevada the year before. And due to that, of course, they got a whole bunch of money to improve. And so they bought every kid a MacBook Pro. And so that's when it just took off for me.
Quite the story, quite the journey. My sister was actually in the same Notre Dame program to kind of get teachers into these kind of up and coming schools.
Yeah. It's great program. Really, it was, I think for me, ACE put me in a trajectory, especially being an African-American male, given that there are not a lot of black males teaching, right? Especially teaching in elementary school. They put me on the trajectory to do that and see how valuable that was. Yeah.
So today, what's kind of your personal computer setup? What do you end up using? Do you use iPad Pros to get stuff done? Are you on the Mac or?
iPad Pro for all my drawings and my doodling, my photo editing and stuff like that when I want to be mobile. I've got a 27-inch iMac, the 5K that I roll with for everything else. My my MacBook I'm giving to my niece because she wants to become a vlogger and stuff. So I've given her the MacBook, and I'll probably invest in another MacBook Pro probably this summer. But if it didn't come across in the article, Apple makes being creative a lot easier than the PCs do, especially when you talk about school age children. And it's just it's so the difference is so stark that right now my kindergartners, my first graders, and my special ed students are all still on their iPads. We were a one-to-one iPad school all the way through. Every kid had an iPad before the pandemic, and so the kinders, the first, and the special ed students kept their iPads, and we just let them take those home. The older students, we left their iPads at the school, and they were given Chromebooks. The difference between what a kindergarten, first grade student is able to produce on the iPad as opposed to what a second, third, fourth, fifth grade student is able to produce, and the ease in the production of those things is just, it's incredible. It's night and day.
Yeah. And we'll get into a little bit later the whole difference between that. And there's a big difference in, Chromebooks, which is basically a web browser versus the iPad.
Yeah. You got a lawnmower that you can type on, essentially.
Yeah. So your iPad, what are some of your core favorite apps you use to get your job done on it?
Keynote over everything, man. Keynote of everything. I mean, Keynote does anything I needed to do generally. And I think most of my students feel that same way. The camera, you can't do anything with the camera, just is amazing. In terms of non-Apple stuff, apps that aren't Apple proprietary, I mean, all the Adobe stuff. So Adobe Creative Cloud, big into just editing things on the fly, Premiere Rush, those things are huge. Synth for some of the podcasting stuff my students do. The Synth app is amazing. Just for very quick micro podcasts that kids need to produce quickly. And thank God it also works on Chromebooks. But pretty much, I mean, again, the thing about the iPads that make them powerful is Apple gives you for free all the tools that you need to do what you need to do with. I mean, I'm not the biggest Pages fan. I do use Pages on the publish, EPUBs very quickly, but
yeah,
Keynote is my jam. An hourly basis, we're going through. Here's some different way to use Keynote for students to be creative, whether that's designing album covers, editing photographs, tutorials, making movies, all that stuff. I mean, it's just it is the Swiss Army knife of my iPad. My students leave my class knowing that.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, especially once you start to learn the animation stuff in there and the quick masking stuff. There's a lot in there.
Yep.
One of the things you're talking about with creation on the iPad, something that just delighted me when I discovered stop motion animation was these iPad apps that let you do that. Have you guys played at all with stop motion animation, just seeing how you could turn a penny into this rolling kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, we do a lot of the jump cuts with clips. I think that's hilarious and fun to do once the kids kind of get an idea about that. It's good. So the complication with the pandemic is that a lot of the things that I would do with them hands-on, I can't do, and I have to trust their grown-up to do that. And so those kids who have heavy grown-up involvement, they generally are able to be successful. Those who don't, if they have tech-savvy grown-ups, and that's another big distinction I think that's been undersold during the pandemic, is if the pandemic has exposed the fact that there was a large gulf between those who had technology and those who didn't, also those who had technology that was high-quality technology and those who didn't, also those kids who had technology instructions and those who didn't. It also exposed this big gulf that popped the idea that adults knew how to use their devices. And it's been really eye-opening to have parents who have iPhones, who have tablets, who have, devices, and they're like, I don't know what that is.
And on the iPad, there is no remote control mechanism like you have on the Mac. So it's really something you need to be able to describe what you need to do step by step.
Yeah, and you have the situation where I have an iPad Pro and those kids have the 329 iPad.
Yeah, just the basic. Yep.
So you have a different interface. I have a large. So when we start talking about, hit your home button, and my kinders who've never been physically in school before are like, what are you talking about? So that was the struggle the first month of school. It's okay, let's go through every class period. Here's the geography, the physical geography of your iPad.
Yeah.
Mr. Lang says this is what I mean. When Mr. Lang says this is what I mean. So I think a lot of the conversations that we're having in the country around distance learning and some of the negative connotations it's getting, it's because I don't think there's a lot of instructors, unfortunately, who thought to nuance their instruction enough to say these kids don't know how to, the physical architecture of the device needs to be gone over first.
Yeah. Do you end up teaching the gestures from the iPad Pro? Because I think they still work on the other iPads. It's just there's no bar there. You just have to, I think, it'll still function with the gestures. They're just less nice.
We do gestures. We make sure the kids all are really good with the accessibility features, because I think those accessibility features make the iPad a lot easier to use, whether you need them or not. Yeah. Really walking them through the accessibilities. Also, really being pointed in using screenshots when I'm live with them, encircling things with my Apple Pencil and drawing arrow. Okay, cool. I know where you're going now. Ensuring that the kids know that the speech to text is there, and that microphone on their keyboard will let them access things, because it's, my youngest learners and my special ed students have access to the iPads. And a lot of times those kids are the ones that have difficulties with spelling and, being able to identify letters and things, especially at the beginning of the school year.
Yeah. How many of the students, if any, have physical keyboards? Is it entirely touch, or do they have a stylus and keyboard as well?
To my knowledge, no kid has a physical keyboard attached to their iPad.
Okay.
No kid. So everyone's just using their touch. There are some students. If I had one major gripe with Apple, it would be the cost of the Apple Pencil. The cost is like it's cost prohibitive for a public school. I know some private schools that do have Apple Pencils for all their students, but we looked at the Logitech. Even the Logitech was like $50.
Right, the crayon. Yeah.
And the crayons. Once you use the Apple Pencil, you don't go to anything else. It's just that much better, in my opinion, than anything else that's out on the market. And the kids really get angry when they see me drawing with my pencil. I'm like, ask your mom. For your
right, yeah, it's a third the cost of the device they're using, yeah.
Yeah, so it is what it is, though.
Yeah. When you're actually at the school itself, do you have like a classroom stylus to share or not really? It doesn't even make sense at that point.
We'll give them the El Cheapo specials from the dollar store that
Gotcha.
are the rubber tip ones. And I have 3 crayons. And what I'll do is just I call them my pilot. So there's one student who runs the entire class as I just like narrate and stop and whatever. And that pilot gets the crayon, so they can actually go through the lesson like the other teacher. So
gotcha. And typing on the glass, that's not an issue for kids. They kind of learn it from day one, and they're fast. And
so I'm married to a principal, and which makes for very interesting pedagogical conversations.
Yeah.
And she's huge into one of the reasons why she wasn't a big proponent of iPads is because they didn't have keyboards or physical keyboards. And I push back on that like every time someone gives me that as a reason for why they don't have iPads, especially when I see those people who took traditional typing class still hunting and pecking on the keyboard. Those kids take to it quickly. The only reason that at the beginning there's the issues with them typing is because they can't identify all the letters.
Yeah.
And so, kinder kids, oftentimes you're talking about November, December, then they can identify half the letters. But that's why I think the speech to text is such a powerful tool to allow kids, again, to write without being able to identify letters. If they can speak it, they can access higher level projects than just being handcuffed to the fact that they are, functionally illiterate. And the Chromebook won't let you do that with the same amount of ease as the iPad does. So it's a no-brainer for kinders, in my opinion. Again, every time something comes up, my wife is, we have to test. And so with testing, they have to have the keyboards. And you're like, okay, well, what typing program are you using? I don't use a typing program. The kids, because we're doing actual projects that they want to do, the kids figure out what those letters are.
Yeah.
And these kids are, especially your older students, those kids are texting from the time they're 6. So the typing thing, I don't really waste too much time on.
Yeah, and I guess for tests, if you need a physical keyboard, there's a way to just have cheap wired keyboards. I guess the adapter to Lightning would be the expensive part in that component, I guess.
Yeah.
Since I was a student, we didn't have dictation as a thing. Has that changed the game with, I know spelling was a thing we all needed to learn. I guess you still do that these days, but how has dictation changed the equation with all that?
I mean, you're dealing with somebody. I am totally against spelling tests. Like, that's just, it's silly at this point, in that the device is going to correct your spelling when it's necessary. Now, if there's the cool thing about dictation, first of all, is you're expanding a kid's vocabulary by default, right?
Yeah. This
thing is going to, when you show the kid the screen reader, it's allowing that kid to go in. First of all, this is perhaps if it's text above their grade level, the reading level, they can still access it because it'll be read to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're also identifying words, and I don't know that word. Great, write the word down. Oh, I really like how that you're making, in my opinion, you're allowing kids to fall in love with language.
And you can highlight words and have it define the word and speak it to you and all that.
Yeah. Instead of like functionally, when you look at the neuroscience, right, we look at the beginning of a word, we look at the end of the word, and then our brain just fills in the letters, right? So in terms of home, I look at cool. I don't need to know how to spell that word in order to use that word, right? And it becomes a scenario to me where vocabulary instruction and acquisition is the important part. Spelling the words. Alfie Kohn, the ed writer, is married to a neurosurgeon, and he has a really cool story about his wife in which she can literally do brain surgery, but she can't spell. And like that, it's a joke, and you're like, yeah, this because that's a really silly way to like determine whether somebody's intelligent or not, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, the dictation thing, it changes the game because it allows kids. And remember, the dictation not only works in English, it works in other languages as well. So your kids who are learning English, who perhaps have to go and have that their iPad in Spanish, they're able to hear it in their native language and still do some of the activities that we're doing.
Right. And I was just thinking with the multiple languages, if a student is learning multiple languages, their virtual keyboard will update, so you don't have to buy 5 different keyboards or how many languages you're learning.
Yep.
So you start with students as young as 5 years old, is that right?
Yeah.
What's your process for getting them up to speed with the iPad? You mentioned just orientation of the device and just kind of the accessibility features. Is that kind of the starting point?
Accessibility features and relevance, right? So it's like I think what's happening in education finally is a lot of teachers are starting to treat students as users instead of students, right?
Yeah.
How do I make the user successful? That's my whole point. How do I make the user successful? I've got to have something that's relevant to the user that the user is going to want to do. And so when you start showing kids jump cuts and clips, if you start showing kids animations and Keynotes, if you start showing kids how you can utilize the camera to take black and white photos, those things excite kids. And they're like, oh, this is really cool. Can I do that? How do you do that? And suddenly you have you have students who are going to want to learn because they want to learn rather than this is the standard that we're dealing with today. And so that's when you have the opportunity to have kids explore, because a lot of the things that previously I would have, very, very much scaffolded and said, okay, you go from here to here to here. Those kids exploring, they're going to find those things out themselves. And it's like, are you a gamer at all?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so, and this is what I get with kids all the time. They instantaneously get this, right? Like I'm not going to speak for you. When I was young, you go buy the physical video game for your Nintendo, right?
Yep.
And you throw the case one way, and you would teach yourself how to play the game.
Totally.
Like literally,
yep.
Buttons that you, right? And so now with kids downloading digital games, they don't come with instruction manual. Like there's a tutorial, a mission or whatever that kind of gives you the basics. But a lot of the higher end features you have to figure out yourself.
Totally.
And so then the kids start saying, okay, I have a very real metaphor to compare this with. Okay, this is what you're asking us to do. We're playing Call of Duty essentially now, dude. All right, okay, cool. Let me hunt and find how do you do X, Y, Z? And one kid finds it and he tells another kid who tells another kid, she tells another kid. And now you have this viral thing happening that cuts a lot of your workload, down because the kids have figured out how to do certain things.
Right. Yeah. And talking about creation on the iPad, something I'm excited for in the future. I know the iPad Pro does this now. I'm not sure if the low-end ones can do this, but you can be capturing video from both the front-facing camera and the rear camera on the iPad Pro. And once that gets down to the lower-end ones, that's going to be really cool for creation from a single device, having those two different angles capturing simultaneously.
Yep. I mean, speaking of apps, I love Double Take from Filmic. Is really a cool app to use for that's having that same functionality, right? The ability to use both cameras at the same time and be able to right now walk kids through my neighborhood and say, okay, cool. You're going to be taking what you're going to do is be walking through your neighborhood as well. And you're going to be, hanging out, make sure you have your mask on, of course.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely agree that that's going to give kids an even cooler tool to utilize in order to create stuff.
Yeah. So how do you go about budgeting new apps? Do you focus on free apps and try to get a new site license for a paid app like once a year? How do you go about expanding the kind of software you're able to access? Because a lot of apps are not free.
So I focus mainly on things that are free, just because if we have students who are 100% free and reduced lunch school, we're Title I school. If kids want to, pre-pandemic, what my big thing was transference to home. So I didn't want to have the parents have to buy any apps.
Yeah.
To the iPad at school, right?
Right.
And so that's why, again, I applaud Apple very much And in the project, the I'm a Dreamer 2 project, none of those apps and none of those processes cost anything. All the apps that we utilize are either Apple proprietary or like PBS Kids, Scratch Junior is totally free as well. The cool thing again about the iPad is you can do some very high level projects and a high level creation for free. And do we have a couple paid apps? Yeah, it's a pain because we have 800 some odd kids, and some well, even 99 cents, that's $1,000, right?
Right.
$500 or whatever it is. They give you the 10 licenses and 10 free or whatever it is. And it's kind of a hassle to even do. And so generally what I'll do is I'll beg, especially if it's a small independent coder or whatever, I'll just, hey, look, I'm going to go and I'm going to run your app through the paces and perhaps show you some things that your app couldn't do, or some places where you can apply this app in a K-12 setting. Yeah. And a lot of times they'll give you I'll give you like 25 licenses, and I'll give those to one class, and we'll just do stuff with that one class. So, again, money is a premium, unfortunately. Again, everybody has to make a buck. So I'm not saying give all your stuff for free to schools. It's just that, I do think very, very much that Apple had you remember when the whole iLife suite and stuff wasn't as accessible and free as it is now.
Yeah,
right?
It used to be $10 an app. On the Mac, it was like $49, I think, for the bundle. Yeah.
And so, I mean, thank God they moved to a model where I get the device, I have these instantaneous quick creation tools at my beck and call. What I will say is that we have all the Google apps on our devices, and those help kids out. But like the Adobe Spark being free at the premium level for K-12 students is also a game changer in terms of Adobe does really, 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 really cool, beautiful things, and giving those kids access to the Adobe ecosystem for free, and it's kind of like how Google does their free stuff. As long as you give them access to your at the administrator level, everything's free. Those kids are making incredible things, posters and whirligig weird things, and then be able to take those things and then integrate those things back into Keynote or vice versa. It's really cool as well to see.
Yeah. Do you guys end up using Google Classroom, or do you use Apple's tools for kind of classroom management and assignments and turning that stuff in?
Right now, we're using Clever as kind of the entryway into our ecosystem. We used Apple Classroom for a while when we were face to face. I think Apple Classroom is a app and a concept that has potential. I don't think that it's where it could be, especially with little kids like the K1s. It was just too much of a pain to go and manage everyone's Apple ID and push things through. Our school district also blocks FaceTime, which also stinks, and so kind of like loses some of the attractiveness there. Google Classroom, a lot of them are using. But Canvas is the state learning management system, and it's our district's learning management system, that the preferred learning management system as well. So kind of interesting thing with Canvas is that Apple also uses Canvas for a lot of their current professional learning and stuff when they're pushing it out. Just signed up for a class to learn how to use to look at Swift in high school, but I think that's kind of interesting that Apple's also using Canvas. So it kind of gives me makes me feel good that Apple sees the value in that learning management system as well.
This episode of iPad Pros is sponsored by PDF Expert by Readle, the ultimate PDF editor for iPad, iPhone, and Mac. The PDF file format is one of the most ubiquitous file formats out there, and every time I need to do work with PDFs, I find myself returning again and again to PDF Expert. PDF Expert, if you haven't tried it out, is the essential PDF app for iPad. The app brings the power of desktop PDF editing to the iPad and lets you easily do any PDF task. I often find myself needing to edit text in existing PDF or do annotations proofing PDFs for others. The other big challenge I have on the iPad is compressing very large PDFs. I often find myself with these insanely large 100 megabyte plus PDF files that are hard to share with others, and PDF Expert is the best tool I've found to compress those PDFs into something that retains the quality while making the file size nice and small and shareable. PDF Expert is also a champ at merging PDFs, so if you export all of your chapters of your book individually, the app makes it easy to merge those into a single file. The developers have also really thoughtfully integrated the Apple Pencil. making annotations feel so natural on the iPad. With PDF Expert and an Apple Pencil, I couldn't think of a better setup for working with PDFs than this. Many past guests who work both on the Mac and iPad go to the iPad for PDF work because of this amazing combination. As a teacher, PDF Expert makes it easy to grade student assignments and provide feedback. You can write in the margins with the Apple Pencil, highlight mistakes, add pop-up notes with comments and custom stamps. You can even record audio notes and add them right into the PDF files. For example, foreign language teachers can record the right pronunciation of a word and place it right in the PDF. With remote learning, this can be an invaluable tool, recording entire lessons and embedding them right inside the PDF for students to listen to as they review the accompanying PDF. You'll hear the importance later in this interview for students having these downloaded lessons on their iPad. Many students have unpredictable internet access, and these lessons can be invaluable to create as a teacher to allow those students the ability to learn wherever they are. For live teaching sessions, you can share your screen over Zoom and annotate slides in PDF Expert while explaining the material. The possibilities really are endless with PDF Expert. Get started with PDF Expert today by downloading the app for free in the App Store. Learn more at pdfexpert.com. That's www.pdfexpert.com. My thanks to PDF Expert by Riedel for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at pdfexpert.com. So this project you designed for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, how'd you go about designing it? What were your goals in doing so?
I think everything is, I think as a curriculum designer, if you will, you always have to consider what the manifest functions of what you're designing are and what the latent functions are. And it didn't originate as a Martin Luther King thing. It was just like, we always want to have students thinking empathically or empathetically with others. And so, especially, when you're 5 and 6 and those kids, are new to school, right? So,
yeah.
In August, I had done a project with Apple in last January 2020 that focused on public service announcements and kind of looking at what kids could do to change their communities. And that kind of got me thinking about other ways I could do some things. And when the blessing was that when the older students were given the Chromebooks, I couldn't utilize them with Apple anymore because they didn't have the devices. And so dealing with the little kids, you have to be willing to go places with lessons that perhaps you didn't think, they'd go, right? So
yeah.
The biggest thing to me, and I think it's quoted in the article, is just like you can't start thinking about the world unless you understand who you are yourself, right? So I thought, centering that self-discovery and encouraging self-discovery is the first thing to deal with before we dealt with anything else. And so Christian Robinson's book, You Matter, that's telling kids, whether they're in a great situation right now, not so great, if they've got brothers and sisters, if they don't, if they've got family and they don't, that you're a person that's important. And you're a person that's important to myself and the other teachers, because I don't think that you're going to be very open to understanding how special you are unless somebody tells you that. And I don't think kids hear that enough. And I didn't want to start with the Martin Luther King deal because I think a lot of times we perceive Martin Luther King as this bigger than life personality. And I don't think that care is taken to draw parallels between Martin Luther King and yourself and kind of comparing and contrasting. And, and if you don't look at yourself first, then you're not going to be able to look at Martin Luther King as just a person, right?
Right, yeah.
And I didn't want the kids to be in, oh my goodness, he just amazing stuff, and I couldn't do that. Yes, you could. You can do that. Martin Luther King was no different than you are. You are the same, right?
Yeah.
Or you have the potential to do the same thing. And so that's kind of where I went. And we have a lot of, we're looking right now at just the 3-part thing kind of simplifies it. This is going to be like a 6-month project. Right now, we're very, very much looking at photography and how people shoot photographs, what kind of information photographs gives us. What can we photograph? We can photograph ourselves, our community, our grandma, whatever, and really looking at that and then taking that idea and looking at the work of Dorothea Lange, of Gordon Parks, of Daewoo Bay, and just looking at those and saying, okay, cool. These people took cameras and took pictures Could you do this? Of course you could. You could edit a picture and be a photographer you want to. It's more, the deal is not just a Martin Luther King lesson. It's more about empowering students to understand that the world is a malleable place, that it doesn't have to be the way that you see it right now. And encouraging students to say that technology is a way that you can not only impact how the story that's told about your community, you can help to shape that story as well.
Yeah. I think it was Steve Jobs that mentioned at some point in some interview that when he realized that adults weren't these, geniuses or whatever, they were just these normal people that, some changed the world just by being a little bit above average, by trying, that it really changed how we viewed things. Yeah. So when you're designing these projects, are you mind mapping? Are you just jotting things down on paper? What's your, creation process with these projects?
All design thinking type stuff. It all goes back to your user, right? Again, I kind of evolved my practice to student as user, and always considering student as user. And saying, okay, cool, what do I need the user to be able to do? And what does the user like? And there is not a kid on planet Earth that doesn't like photography and video and making videos.
Yeah.
I've got one of my students has 1,000 TikTok followers, and he's in second grade. And you're like, okay. So the kids all want to know how to do that. How do you take that and make the video creation process part of whatever they need to do? That's the I think the $64,000 question all the time. And so it's definitely a design thinking approach to it. And I'm a big fan of Louis Sullivan. So my little idea or my riff on design thinking. Louis Sullivan was the mentor to Frank Lloyd Wright. So if you're an architecture fan, he kind of like birthed Frank Lloyd Wright in the game. He wrote a book called Kindergarten Chats, which is not a kindergarten text by any means. But famously, he said, ever form follows function, right? So I kind of said, okay, look, I want to think in 3 layers. What's the function of the lesson? What's the form of the lesson? What's the aesthetic of the lesson? And so function, what exactly are we trying to solve? Form, what could the solution to what we're trying to solve look like? And then aesthetic, how can we make that solution better? That's generally how I try to loosely organize my thoughts as we start to build things. I say loosely because what I want is the kids to fill in the middle. I don't want to have these, again, uber structured, there's only one right answer type units. I want there to be, and Kathy Hunt, if you don't follow Kathy Hunt on Twitter, she's an amazing educator in Australia, amazing educator. She's an art instructor. She famously said, if we have a project and everybody's project looks the same, what was the point? And that's kind of the mentality I've taken on in especially last 5 or 6 years, where I want people like really going divergent with things. It needs to be open-ended enough that every student's project looks totally different than some other kid's project looks.
Yeah, just give them the starting point for them to get their wheels turning.
Yep.
So the first part of this project is to capture and edit images of themselves, family, neighborhood, to craft their story about why they matter. And this is using the PBS Kids Scratch Junior app. What is this app like? What kind of capabilities does it have for them to do this?
So the thing I like about Scratch, and for the older kids, Scratch Junior, is that it's I never tell the kids they're coding in quotation marks. Right. They're never. I don't really care about I think coding is kind of a buzzword that's kind of catching on, but I think all learning, all teaching, all life is storytelling, right? The human existence is storytelling. We study history because there's stories. The story to the future. Everything is a story. If you can create a narrative that is compelling enough, then people will listen to you. And that's sometimes good and that's sometimes bad, right? And so the cool thing about PBS Kids Scratch Junior and the regular Scratch Junior app that's available on the iPad as well is that it's straight block coding, and it's block coding in this very basic way that it's very approachable, it's color coded, it's sequential, and the 5 or 6 year old student is they're not intimidated by it. And when they start to see how things work, you're like, oh my God, this is really cool. And when we start to play around, as we will in a couple of weeks, with how can I take the photographs that I took and put them into this ecosystem and then essentially create a story about the photographs that I took. Could you do that with Keynote? Absolutely, positively. Did I make it difficult for a reason? Absolutely, positively. I think giving those kids exposed to block coding, the idea that, again, in my opinion, all the coding languages, and they're called languages for a reason, is storytelling. They're referred to as languages. What do we do with language? We tell stories. We have conversations. We, get people from point A to point B. And I think trying to show them, and to kind of go back to your kind of analogy there, the Steve Jobs quote, the magic. My job is to pull back the curtain in Oz, right, and say, this dude is not pop. This dude is not. He's just a regular person.
Yeah,
and you're a regular person, and you can do exactly what this person does. Especially the fact that our school is majority Latin and African American. That these students do not see themselves represented in those professions publicly. Right, those kind of professionals do not live in their neighborhoods. More quickly, we can debunk the fact that this is something that is beyond your purview. I think the better we're going to have diverse talents come in and do amazing things in our country.
Yeah, and it does take people just seeing themselves as, oh, I can do that. Yeah, it's a huge deal for that realization to happen. The output from Scratch Junior, does it output as video, or what kind of output does the app provide?
There is no output. So what they're going to do is just record their screens. So they're going to play their program and record their screens, which is another reason why I wanted to use it, because it shows them the record screen function and how that can be used.
Yeah, the record screen function's amazing. Like, you can do like animations kind of in a kind of hacky, cool way of just recording the screen and editing from that.
Yep. And that's something that their classroom teachers don't use. And I wanted to use the record screen function in this really purposeful way that would highlight it, so the kids would say, okay, cool, what other things could I record on my screen? Yeah. So that, again, I think that the blessing with having done this for so long is you start to see, like, okay, cool, how can I go and make this difficult so the kid learns something for later on? Right. And that's part of the fun thing of learning through these challenges, is through these obstacles, you do learn some different approaches, like, oh, that was, I can use this in the future, another tool for the toolbox. Yep. So the next part of the project was research Dr. King's life and legacy and compare and contrast themselves to him by creating these double exposure portraits of themselves with Dr. King. So first off, can you explain what a double exposure portrait is for those that aren't familiar with this kind of image? Essentially, we're masking, we're blending two photographs together, and it can be done any number of ways. You can have, those things overlapping with one another, intersecting with one another. One of the things last year, one of the fifth graders did was he essentially Swiss cheesed two photographs together. And it's like really weird way that I would have never thought to do a double exposure. We had kids last year who did like almost like horror movie photographs where they took the idea of masking shapes and whatnot and had pictures poking out of different places. This is really, really cool stuff. Yeah. And so when I say double exposures, I'm kind of speaking, how can we blend pictures and images together, and giving kids kind of carte blanche to say, okay, kid, do your darndest to do some weird photograph that still gives me the essence of, in this case, Dr. King and I are the same, yet Dr. King and I are separate and different. And I really wanted that to come across visually for the students to be able to do that. And what we're doing right now, what we're going to do with all of the work that they deal with, is kind of like a virtual art installation with all the photographs they're taking and kind of their explanation of why they took them. And so that hopefully we're going to be able to get enough students who sign off the fact that we can present these things publicly so that people can virtually walk through this art gallery that is going to have hopefully all of their artwork, their Scratch Junior stuff output, as well as some things from clips, kind of an interviewing the artist type situation, so that people can kind of get intimate with those students and what their thought processes were. But I thought the double exposure deal kind of really, really spoke to what I'm trying to get at with the students, that we are different, yet we are the same. Yeah. Did you recommend any apps for them to use for this, or they kind of figure what works best for them? So, we're gonna go by the oldies but goodies. We're gonna take Keynote, and we're gonna show them how to play around with Keynote and how to make those things happen and allow them to be creative in that space. I'll show them the basics for how to do it and let them iterate on it. So again, that's why Keynote is that's the boss app in my opinion. free and it has as many uses as you can think of for it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And did you show kind of examples of what students have done in the past for these double exposures, or did you just kind of describe it and let their creativity go from there?
We're not there yet, but when we get there, I do the project with the students, so they'll see, hey, Mr. Lang's interpretation of what the deal is, and I will say that you'll have three groups of students. You have students that'll look at my work and say, okay, I'm going to copy exactly what you did because that's the right answer.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, fine. Copy exactly what I did. You have kids who will say, okay, I'm inspired by that, but I'm going to do mine this way. And then you'll have students who go in a totally different bonkers way because they understand the point, and they'll say, okay, cool, let me show you what I can do. And so I love those type of students because what ends up happening is why design thinking is such a great philosophy to have. You'll have the students that just copied my work, see what the real wild Jackson Pollock students did. And they'll say, oh my goodness, I could do that. Yep, you could do that. Oh, I'm gonna go change it. And then now you have this peer pressure, this positive peer pressure that allows students to go and say, oh, I was thinking too small. This other person thought really, really big. I could do that too.
And how's the peer pressure component? How's that stuff work virtually? Like, has that dynamic changed of the collaborative nature of learning?
Yes and no. So I think the interesting thing, we use Google Meet. They do have the breakout room function in there finally after months. So you can put kids into rooms with one another, but you can also have a situation where you're just like, hey, who wants to show their artwork very quickly? I do. And you have this like fight to show what I just drew. I want to show you what picture I took, whatever. And so you have this again, and the kid will present their screen and you'll see kids' faces light up. Like, how did you do that? What's going on with that? Whatever. And hey, Penelope, can you walk us through, like, how did you get that weird light in the top left-hand corner? Oh, I went and I took this lampshade and I just pointed it toward what I want. Oh, okay, cool. So what's the way you can get weird lights in there? Today at Apple classes, I was always at the day in Apple classes when we were pre-pandemic. Some of the little weird techniques that they showed us at the Apple stores, I always kind of just walk kids through, like, taking leaves from outside and put them in front of your camera and see what those things do. Adding shadows to it unnaturally, laying on your back and taking pictures from like weird angles and stuff like, and the kids will get into it and they'll do all kind of weird stuff. And so I think as long as you give them permission to be themselves, kids do all kind of strange, weird stuff that's like totally out of things that your adult brain would never contemplate.
Right. Yeah. So the final part of the project asks the students how they can be of service to each other and their neighbors. Mm-hmm. What kind of format do you expect the students to share this in? Are they going to make a little short podcast talking about this, or what kind of format do you expect this to be in? Really
hammer in with clips, just because I think clips is for micro podcasts. I think it's like the best thing on the iPad that's free.
How great is it that it finally has an iPad version, so you're not using this big blown up iPhone version?
That has been very, very nice, especially with the iPad Pro.
Yeah.
Like, it's very nice to be able to fill my screen up. Yeah, taking the clips and really forcing them to look at that way. But also, we're going to take a lot of the pictures and essentially build a book in pages with their images and their ideas and stuff, and kind of just build it all together and hopefully publish that. So that my goal is to publish all the kids' work as well as my lesson plans and ideas into one volume, and saying, here, teacher friends, if you want to kind of use this as a starting point for any work that you want to deal with, here it is. And really get the kids authentic ideas about what they thought about it. But also, I want to send that artwork and that travel installation to some of the local senior citizen homes and start to have those present to the seniors about ideas that, their ideas and how everything went, and what they got, because I think that is it's a market that I didn't tap in before the pre-pandemic because of the fact that the kids couldn't physically go there.
Yeah.
But now no one can physically go there. I think, really, really reaching out to those older elders in our community and having those elders kind of look at what these kids are perceiving about the community they live in, I think is going to be really powerful as well.
The isolation right now, I can imagine, is just really bad in those kind of communities, and that'll be great for them. So the interactive Keynote you build for these projects, what kind of tools are you building into these Keynotes? Like what components of Keynote are you tapping into to make these workbooks?
So, I mean, the biggest thing for me is because we're dealing with a lot of visual arts, just placeholders, and the kids get used to, okay, this is a play. I can put a picture here, I can put a video here, I can put whatever there. So the placeholders are big for me. The other thing is just making it very visually attractive. Again, I love Adobe stuff, so I'll go and I'll build backgrounds in Adobe and use fonts and things like that, and build those things all built inside there. But not one of the things I make sure that I don't do is go overboard. Mm-hmm. I do want the kids to have a space to design their own space. You know what I'm saying? So it's really, as bare bones as I can get it. And to tell you the truth, I iterate on that almost every other day. Like, hey, I can make this keynote better by taking this away or adding this little piece or doing this thing, or like re-recording those audio instructions I put on page number 3. So when the kid, one of the things we're finding with a lot of students is, due to the nature of the world at this point, a lot of families who are food insecure and housing insecure are on the move all the time. And so they may not show up for class. So they need to have the ability to have that stuff on their iPad already downloaded and me walking them through what they need to do. And so I think, again, that's another reason why, again, Keynote is balls. I can just record my voice right on the thing, my tutorial right inside there, and then God bless you.
So I was just thinking about just storage in general as you're talking. Does the program with Apple, the kind of Apple Classroom and stuff, do they give iCloud storage to students, or how's that component all work?
So the kids all have 100 gigs of iCloud storage. They also have unlimited Google Drive space because we're a Gabe district as well. Okay. So the kid, what the problem was at the beginning, again, especially with the kinders, was that usually when we're hands-on and writing one another's faces, I can walk kids through, hey, we want to always save to the cloud, save the cloud, save the cloud. You have one local copy that you're working on, but everything you're not working on in the cloud. Not so much this year because of the fact that, again, I have not physically been in the same room with any of these students so far. Yeah. And so it was a lot of reliance on grown-ups, and, Google makes it a lot easier for you to access their Google Drive because the kids' primary email is their Gmail. Right. Having the kids have to go in, Apple, I very much applaud them for the security and the safety, but it's a pain in the butt when you're dealing with 5 and 6-year-olds. And here's your temporary email, temporary password. Plug this in real quickly, and remember, we have to trying to get the kids to use password managers like LastPass and stuff is also like a loss. It's very difficult over the internet, in that, again, their parents more than likely do not use LastPass. No, and so you're in a situation in which you don't have a role model to help those kids out with that either. So that's a pain. When you are teaching in person, what's kind of your classroom setup? With an iPad, you don't have to have all these like iMacs stationary, and you're kind of more flexible in kind of the configuration. Because I have the coolest principal in America, and I'm going to say that publicly, the coolest principal in America. My classroom is a classroom full of iMacs. Oh, so that is awesome. So I've got a bunch of iMacs, and every kid has their own iPads. We have this situation where kids can hand off between devices. Kids can go and take, iMovie on the iPad is pretty cool. iMovie on the Mac makes it a lot easier to do higher end edits and other things to deal with. Having the computer also gives us access to the Adobe Spark apps are limited as in comparison to what the Adobe Spark apps can do on the actual computer. Yep. And so giving kids the ability to do higher end edits on their graphics and things like that, a lot easier. Given that they have the 2 devices now. My kinders and my first graders don't touch the iMacs just because those classes tend to be larger and I don't have the space. But the 2nd through 5th grade students all they bring their iPad in. They have a iMac station as well where they can do other work if they decide to. With the iMacs, is it often the first experience they've had with the mouse for these students? Especially the Mac mouse, right? Yeah. So you don't have the two prongs there. So it's a change in that Unfortunately, I think most students, if they have experience with a computer, it's a laptop and it's a PC laptop. And so they're dealing with the trackpad. When they sit at the computer, there is some discomfort and, whatever. The kinders toward the middle of the school year, I do put them on the Macs in order to learn how to put their fingers on the mouse.
Yeah.
And utilize the mouse and how to click and all that kind of stuff like that. Just because, when they become first and second graders, that's one less thing I have to teach them.
Right. Yeah. I was wondering what that experience is like of here's the mouse. It's got to be wild for some kids.
So you can take, for those who are looking for like a secret, what I do is take pieces of Velcro and put the opposite sides of the Velcro on the two different halves of the Mac mouse. And then they can determine by feel what they're supposed to do. And eventually we take them off and the kids, that muscle memory that their fingers remember what they're supposed to do after about 6 months.
Yeah. So for the Keynote files you create, are those all done from the iPad Pro, or do you go to your iMac to do some of the more heavy stuff you're doing in Keynote?
So start on the Pro, especially when, the wife wants to watch TV or something like that. I'm working and whatever. And then I'll come back and, again, the wonder of iCloud is amazing. And just pull up and say, okay, I need something a little bit, sturdier here. I need a little bit more power here. I want these to nest a little bit better. Using your computers a lot. I mean, again, a Keynote on the iPad is baller, but Keynote on your Mac is better.
Yeah. Yep.
A lot of things you can do.
So for making that final pages, volume, as you said, of everything, is that going to just be a manual process of kind of going through all the kids' projects and copy and pasting everything into the final compilation?
So, fundamentally what I'm doing is the kids can put whatever work they want in their Keynote, whatever they want. I mean, I don't have to peruse that or whatever. I mean, again, I think one of the cool things about art is always in the eye of the beholder. And so I just ask that they have certain requirements, but I don't grade in quotation marks their art. What I am doing is essentially just a Google form where they'll drop the pieces that they like into the form, and then I'll have all those pieces. And I'll have, okay, these are the pieces the kid's comfortable with me sharing. And I'll just take those and start to build the pages file.
Okay, awesome. Anything else about that project in particular before we move on?
It's just I think the project is first of all, I not that I wasn't honored that Apple said, hey, this is the guy that's doing some cool stuff. I mean, there's a lot of teachers doing a lot of cool stuff out here, especially around social justice, around the SDGs that the World Health Organization and the UN have, rather, a lot of really cool stuff. And, it just happened to be that I was a guy that got picked this time. But I do want to spotlight there's a lot of teachers doing a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. As far as making the pitch to your school administration about going with iPads over Chromebooks, was it much of a hard sell for them to go this route? Chromebooks, as we know, are cheaper.
Yeah, I think that my principal saw the value. She had 2 iPad cards. Before I was her digital learning coach, and the digital learning coach was essentially like that. I did a lot of professional learning around tech integration before I became a member of the school. And she had iPads, and I would come in and help the teachers that iPads do. Kids were making movies, kids were doing podcasts, and kids that weren't in the traditional model of education wouldn't be people that you would expect to be podcasters and vodcasters. Those kids were producing content, right? And she was like, oh my God, how are these kids doing it? I'm like, this is stuff they want to do. They will do it. Like, it's not a big deal. When I decided when essentially that job was, stop being funded by our school district, I said, I'm looking for a place to be. I'll come here if 1, you give me the Mac lab, and 2, we have the goal that in 5 years it'll be 1-to-1. And she said, yeah, it sounds like a plan. And we did the 1-to-1 in 3 years. And so she took every dollar she could get and she invested in iPads. And she started to see the ease in which kids were making, and kind of encouraging teachers to leave here is your test, hit the, A, B, C, D type stuff, and really look more toward how do we allow students to display what they know to the world. And when we made that shift, I think in comparison to the Chromebooks, and she's seeing that now, the Chromebooks don't have that same dynamic ability as easy. And even like, so working with some of the older students, we're doing a similar project with photography as I'm doing with the K1s. Just the Chromebook cameras are so bad, and there's just a front-facing camera. And so you're limited by what you can actually do with the device as well, right? It's not mobile, it's not portable. There's no native, the native edits inside of the Google Photos app and stuff it's not the same, right? And so it does provide an opportunity for me to problem solve in unique ways, to find other tools I can utilize to help the kids make the high-end edits that I want them to make. It does not make it as easy as the iPads are in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, the Chromebooks seem to be designed for, like, you live in Microsoft Office kind of all day. Or not, Google Office, whatever you want to call it. But your spreadsheets and Word docs, and that's what you do. And
it reflects a pedagogy that is a 1970s. You will sit, you will type, you will do the test, you will write an essay, and kids don't want to do that stuff, man.
Yeah. As they get older, are hardware keyboards more necessary, or is that something you really don't need until, say, later middle school or high school?
I mean, I think if you're looking, and so this is I turn this phrase often, especially when I talk about education. I think too often in education we moonwalk into the future, right? Mm-hmm. And we're trying to go forward by looking backwards, and it gets, if you think about the leaps and bounds that technology has made in the last 3 years, right? Yeah. How long do you think it'll be before keyboards are obsolete? I mean, like, when do you think that we'll have devices that, like, we're going to make keyboards so difficult for you to purchase that you're going to say, I don't need this? Like my iPad Pro, I have no keyboard. It's just my Pro. It's there. I use my pencil. The fact that now I can doodle with my pencil in letters and it spells the letters out. I mean, come on, man. Like, what am I messing with a keyboard for? Yeah. Most of these stuff that I do out on my actual Mac outside of hotkeys is with my mouse. It's not typing very long things because I can still dictate that stuff as well. So I think that there is a point where the forward-thinking school district, the forward-thinking teacher is going to say, why waste time at all with the typing where we should be focusing more on what can you make and how can you display what you know to me? Yeah. And if you need to talk into your device.
Right, yeah. So it's a one-to-one program. The older kids they didn't have the devices on them, so they're kind of stuck at school. Is that kind of the situation for the Chromebooks?
Yeah. So the Chromebooks, I think the wisdom in what we did was we didn't want the iPads damaged, like going back in. Yeah. So the Chromebooks blowing up, they have like an 18-month shelf life anyway. Who cares? Yeah. The iPads, we still had iPad 2s on our campus last year.
Okay. Yeah, that was 2012. No, 2011. I mean, yeah, 2011.
Yeah. So I mean, come on, man. Yeah. Like, in terms of investment, the initial cost is more, but the actual cost is less.
Yeah, that's what you said last year. It was the year you finally moved on to newer hardware.
Yeah, and so
it's like an 8-year shelf life for that hardware. That's incredible.
So I mean, if you take care of them, if you make sure you have sturdy covers on them and stuff, those devices will last forever. They'll last forever. And then we took those 2s and we sold them and we got money back for them.
Yeah. And as we're seeing with the M1 Max, these mobile chips, they're incredibly fast. And especially these newer iPads, they'll be lasting a long, long time. Yeah. So a trend I've noticed in technology, as we've talked about these Chromebooks, is, basically we're trying to just transactionally learn, deliver textbook material through technology. How do we kind of encourage teachers to do more of what you're doing, of investing in learning how you can use technology to be more creative and kind of do instruction in a more modern way that kind of progresses us forward more?
I think being self-reflective first. Like, again, I think if you're self-reflective, if we challenge the power paradigm, right, where if we say, again, we are here to serve our user. If the user isn't happy, then what we're doing is not going. We can't be successful if the user's not successful, right? And so when we do professional learning and stuff out here, one of the things I always tell people is like, you walk into a restaurant, you get the worst service of all time. Do you tell your friends to go to that restaurant? Of course not, right? That's a no-brainer. So if a kid has a negative experience in your class and the only thing we're sitting there is sitting down and being bored, that kid checks out, right? You may not be able to leave that class, physically, but there's not going to be a lot of collaboration in that class with you if you're not giving me what I want. And so I think looking at Phil Schlechte's idea of engagement is one of the things that every teacher should look at. Like, an engaged student is somebody who will do your work on their own time. That's when you have a kid. But if you have to prod and coerce kids into doing certain things, I think perhaps that is a reflective moment, right? Like, how can I still make this person or get this person to do what I want them to do in a more attractive way? And that's where, again, if kindergarten and first graders are making movies and taking photographs and explaining out thinking and stuff like that, I don't see an excuse, you know what I'm saying? So I think that it's just looking at what is of value to these students. If that's it's kind of a survey, is that just having conversations with students? Kids love Roblox. Kids love playing video games. They love anime and manga, and they love hanging out with their brothers and sisters and playing at the park. How do you integrate those things into your lessons to make them very attractive? And I think if you add that secret sauce, then suddenly you're not teaching anymore. You're facilitating. And that's a different situation.
Yeah. And for teachers that aren't technology proficient that well, any tips or tricks for having them be great teachers during this kind of virtual time we're in right now?
I don't think you need to know how to use the technology at all. I think you just need to be real enough to understand that you don't need to use technology, because you're probably speaking to a classroom full of people who could run circles around you with the technology anyway.
Yeah. So
how do you go and again say, my kids like this and that and this and that, and have those kids crowdsource their own solutions to problems so that you can take your time to learn them? So again, we're reading. I've sit in front of the Google Meet or the Skype or the Zoom or whatever, and say, hey, we're going to read a story about Paul Bunyan. Great, we're going to write our own tall tale. How could we write the tall tale? Oh, we could shoot a movie of the tall. The kids are going to come up with the ideas. The kids are going to figure out how to do stuff. All you have to do is be there to kind of goad them along, and then that's less work for you.
Totally. Yeah. Well, anything else we haven't covered they'd like to before we wrap it up?
Nah, man, this has been cool.
Yeah, I've had a blast learning about what you do and kind of education in general.
Indeed, and cool.
Yeah. Any places or links you'd like to promote before we wrap it up?
I'm one half of the Intelligent Hoodlums. IntelligentHoodlums.com. We do professional learning and stuff here. So all this stuff that I kind of talk about is all the things that we do professional learning for teachers in Las Vegas and now all over the world, because we can hop on Zoom and stuff and work with people. And so I'm really passionate about this, but I'm also passionate about teachers letting go of the reins, right? And letting the workers do the work. And I think that a lot of the stress, especially at the beginning of my career, that I put upon myself was trying to control things rather than letting the universe was created by chaos, things smacking into one another. So creation is not this pretty organized thing that we can just walk kids through. Sometimes atoms have to hit one another. So the controlling things can sometimes be detrimental to the creation process.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate chatting with you and learning about what you do.
I appreciate it, man. Appreciate the invite.
Well, that was my interview with Mike Lang. My thanks to Mike for his time recording this interview. And my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. My thanks again to PDF Expert by Real for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Download it today for free in the App Store and learn more at pdfexpert.com. You can also support the podcast by reviewing it on Apple Podcasts and over on patreon.com/iPadPros for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to everyone that currently or has in the past supported the podcast over there on Patreon. With that, thank you again for listening, and I'll talk to everyone again real soon.